Aloha ohana. Hello, family. Oh, this turning of the new year, this opening of 2022, this new beginning of a cycle has got me in deep contemplation around some of the layers of numerological meaning associated with this time. And we have the 2022, which adds up to the number 6, which is the number for the lovers. And I think this is such an exquisite metaphor for what we are collectively working through and facing at this time. And a really precious opportunity this year brings a really precious opportunity to learn to be intimate. To learn to be intimate with life, with ourselves, with another being who may be a romantic partner, or maybe a dear friend, or maybe a family member. We have this precious opportunity right now to, in this time, cultivate our capacity for intimacy, for closeness, for navigating life in a collaborative way. There's a huge opportunity to destabilize this programmed sense of isolation and alienation, this pathological sense of individuation that is neither veridical nor supportive of humanity's thriving. And by humanity's thriving, I mean our very personal, individual thriving, because those two things are intimately linked, inextricably so. So I'm out here driving the saddle road and finally having a little bit of space to sit down and talk through some of these contemplations. And what I want to focus more on in this conversation is the 22nd gene key, because 22, we're in a 22 year as well. We're looking at a very powerful jewel at the heart of the Gene Keys transmission. And if you are not familiar with the Gene Keys transmission, I highly recommend going to genekeys.com and getting your hologenetic profile and getting a glimpse into that world, because it's been one of the most valuable wisdom streams that I have been working with over the last several years. It is so relevant to our times. It's so potent and so now, and it's such a consilience, a gathering point of so many different wisdom streams, a truly balanced system in my experience. And the founder, Richard Rudd, is, on the one hand, a genius and a pioneer and a channel for incredible wisdom, and also a very humble, very real dad of 3 kids and a husband and an honest Joe, as they say, and really recognizes that his life, his human life, is the ultimate meditation retreat. That living in the stream of our lives is the most potent place where we find the material that we are here to transmute in our healing process, in our awakening process, as we awaken to more of what we are. So this transmission is more about the 22nd gene key, and it might be lengthy because I don't know how in depth I'm going to go into each of the little fractal layers of this transmission. But it's worth it. It's worth taking the time to do this. It's worth slowing down, and taking a few breaths. And giving ourselves permission to locate ourselves within a paradigm and to connect our intelligence and our conscious awareness, our mind specifically, as I'm talking here, to the quantum field in a very specific way. And it's a way that we haven't been entrained to do in our fast-paced, production-oriented society. But I find the more exquisitely I tend to the frequency of my awareness, the more easily the things that need doing get done by me or someone else, and the more beautifully and artfully my life organizes itself. So, the 22nd gene key. 22nd gene key is a description of a path that encompasses a frequency band between the shadow of dishonor, the gift of graciousness, and the siddhi of grace. And the gene keys, all 64 of them, based as they are on the mathematical equality between the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese divination practice, and our genetic code, the mathematical structure of our genes. These are exactly mathematically same. And each one of the 64 gene keys is arrayed in the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi. You get to see different aspects of the same essence as it is expressed through different frequency bands. And we get to look at the connectedness between, for instance, in the 22nd gene key, the connectedness between dishonor and what that truly means, graciousness and what that essence of graciousness is, and grace, this involving force, this descending force that comes down from the heavenly realms into our lives and fills our lives with grace. We get to look at the connection between these experiences, between these words. And it's really important to recognize, first off, that the shadow is not bad, and the siddhi is not the goal or the good, but that they are all essential to one another in the triune structure of their phenomena. And that Richard Rudd talks a lot about it as the shadow being the seed, the gift being the flowering, and the siddhi being the fruit. And that as we embrace and really open ourselves in curiosity to the shadow, that it unlocks the gift and opens the way for the Siddhi to pour more clearly and beautifully into our lives. And so we don't have to. The more I experiment with this system, and the more I utilize it as a way of clarifying certain energies and patterns in my life, the more I understand the value and the importance of the shadow, of acknowledging that a shadow is a shadow, number one, and not like painting lipstick on it and calling it good. And neither dissociating from the shadow and pulling away from it and avoiding it, nor anxiously, desperately trying to fix the shadow and make it different than it is. But to simply breathe in the presence of dishonor, whether that dishonor is coming towards me from outside of myself, or whether that dishonor is happening outside of me from one to another being, or whether that dishonor is happening within me as I dishonor myself, or I dishonor another, or I dishonor my truth, as I dishonor my dharma, as I dishonor the earth. So we get to look at and hold and breathe with the presence of, in this case, dishonor in our life as we're contemplating the 22nd gene key. As we're letting it light things up in our lives. As we're letting it work on our intelligence. And thanks for your patience as I'm driving here. And when we do this, when we really embrace the shadow and breathe with it and allow it in, then it naturally alchemizes within our being and within our awareness. And from within the seed of that shadow emerges the gift that is available to those with the courage and the perseverance and the gentleness to stay with the difficult parts. And the gift in this case is graciousness. So I want to talk about dishonor, graciousness, and grace today, and unpack a little bit of my own contemplation. And I'm really clear at a cellular level that this is the world that I experience it. This is as I experience life. And I don't expect anyone listening or watching to agree with me, or to be living in the same world as you listen. But I do hope that you will let what I have to say touch you. And I do hope that you will open yourself to a new way, perhaps, of seeing your own life and yourself through this contemplation, and let it inform your contemplation so that you can run your experiments and you can arrive at your hypotheses, not conclusions. We don't arrive at conclusions anymore in this world. We just arrive at hypotheses. And you get to hold that hypothesis and experiment further with it. So please don't take anything I say as a demand to think like me or believe like me or behave like me, for God forbid. But I will invite you, and hopefully I'll do that out loud, but I'll do it up front here, to pause often, to take deep breaths as you chew on and digest this contemplation of the 22nd gene key. to take breaths gently down, down, down into your belly. Let your breath touch your pelvic floor. Let it touch your gut. Let it caress your diaphragm and solar plexus. Let it even bubble up into your heart. So please enjoy this. Please let me know if anything I say stirs a question or a challenge. I love that. And let's breathe deep together into the 22nd gene key. Shadow of dishonor. The gift of graciousness. The Siddhi of grace. The 22nd gene key, a contemplation of the opening of the portal of 2022. Before I enter into the gift and the Siddhi, before I open the shadow, I want to say that this transmission is incredibly rich and full of esoteric knowledge, that it came with a deep mapping of the 7 sacred seals, which are spoken of in the book of Revelation and are, as Richard Rudd calls it, the biological apocalypse, stages of the biological apocalypse, the biological revealing. And it goes deeply into a study of these seals and of the 9 initiations of the soul that are part of the process of healing the sacred wounds of humanity and awakening in the Garden of Eden, awakening in the Queendom. It is, at its essence, a transmission of the divine feminine. And I'm not going to go into all that right now, because there's enough just with the shadow, the gift, and the Siddhi to cover a full contemplation. But I am excited, and I just wanted to name that connection, and that if you choose to study more deeply into the 22nd gene key, which I highly recommend here in 2022, you will find many riches. The shadow of dishonor, the gift of graciousness, and the Siddhi of grace. Let's start in the shadow here. And dishonor is a phenomena that we all have experienced. We've all experienced dishonor in our lives. We've all experienced being dishonored. We've all experienced dishonoring ourselves or another. We've all witnessed dishonor, dishonorable behavior. And the seed and essence of dishonor is to blame, to fail to take complete responsibility for our own experience. And so we have been entrained in a way of dishonor. We have been entrained in a fairly dishonorable society when taken as a whole, when looked at through the lens of what is possible. when you have so much resource in terms of creating systems of human thriving. We have been entrained in a culture that has prepared us to defer responsibility for our experience again and again. And this is a human thing. It's here in our DNA. It's codes operating in our DNA. It's a patterning that operates, that we are all susceptible to one degree or another. And to really embrace the shadow of dishonor, we have to be willing to look at all the places where we dishonor ourselves first, and dishonor our own bodies, dishonor our own truth, which is essentially dishonoring the way that we feel and dishonoring the incredible power that we have to choose our own reality. When we blame another person for our feelings, for our experience, for our lot in life, we dishonor ourselves at the core, because we are outsourcing our power and we are lying to ourselves about the nature of our own being and experience. Because as a sovereign being, I do not necessarily at this point in my evolution get to choose every experience that I have. I don't get to choose what happens all around me. Thank God. How boring would that be? How boring would it be if the only things that ever happened were the things that I consciously chose to happen? That would get so old after a while. That's why we're here in these bodies, dividing up God into all these fractal nodes of sovereign consciousness. But even though I don't get to choose everything that happens in my reality, I have to choose the reality within which it all happens. So I'm going to say that again. Even though I don't get to choose everything that happens in my world, I have to choose the world within which everything that is happening arises. That world is a perception of reality. It is a way of seeing life, and then a way of then responding to and operating within that system of life that I see. And that's to some extent a story. We all have to choose the story that we live in. We have to choose the way that we frame every single experience that we have, because it's not what happens that is definitive of my experience. It is the stories I choose to tell about what happens, the ways I choose to respond to what happens, and the depth to which I allow myself to be fully present for what happens in this moment that is definitive of my experience, and that over time is definitive of my life, is the very essence of how I create my life. And for example, COVID-19 is a thing that's happening. It's hella happening. It's happening all over the fucking place. And I don't get to choose whether COVID-19 happens or doesn't happen. But it is up to me to choose how I perceive COVID-19, what I perceive it to be, and the world within which I perceive it to be operating. I could choose to perceive COVID-19 as a accident that happened in a laboratory somewhere that has unleashed a pretty virulent virus that has a lot of people really panicked, and that has been especially hard on elders and people of color in terms of survival rates. And that everybody around me is doing their very best to make sense of a very complicated issue, and doing their best to follow their own conscience around how to respond to that. And some of those responses are very kind of totalitarian in nature, because people are scared and they're trying to grab control of a situation that feels out of control. That's one way I could perceive COVID-19. That's one world in which COVID-19 could be happening. I could choose a world in which COVID-19 is happening because there is a ancient global cabal of very powerful people who are bent on controlling humanity and controlling life on Earth, and have produced this virus and all of the media attention and all of the laws, and are attempting to steal from humanity another major treasure of our sovereignty by limiting our behavior, by masking us, trying to further program humanity to be subservient and to be disconnected, right? And are trying to, manipulate history through this process. So it's a big scam, and there's a lot of bad guys out there who are trying to hurt us, and anything that we do to comply with that is unconscionable. So that's one other way I could choose to experience COVID-19. Same phenomena, same data, same news reports, same physical vaccines and physical ailment that I was initiated by myself a couple months ago. Or I could choose to locate COVID-19 within a intelligent universe that is always operating in an evolutionary way to awaken form, to awaken the stuff of the material world into more and more exquisite and complex patterns of intelligent behavior. I could locate COVID-19 within a Gaia system, which is a being, a conscious being that includes all of humanity and everything within the biosphere. And that COVID-19 is an initiation, which is, by the way, a self-organizing principle of all life. Life creates the conditions for its own initiation so that it can evolve. Right? That's just an axiom. So I could see COVID-19 as a global initiation, which is being, which we are collectively creating as the intelligence that is Gaia, inviting humanity to evolve and to reflect on the broken patterns that we have been replicating in our societies and in our own personal behavior, and to start to burn off the karma and trauma that has been informing our oppressive, exploitative, alienated, separated, destructive ways of organizing ourselves as a species. So all three of these responses, all three of these worlds that I could locate COVID-19 in, they overlap in certain ways, but they all at the core give rise to a completely different internal chemistry, how I feel about life and what's going on. They give rise to a very different response system. They give rise to very differing capacities to embrace other people's perspectives on what's happening. They give rise to very different perceptions about the nature of people and their motivations. And at the core, they all give rise to very different behavioral patterns, speech patterns, feeling patterns. And for me, as a sovereign being who is committed to uprooting and dissolving and transmuting the shadow of dishonor in my life, I have to look at every place where I would blame somebody else for my experience, where I would point a finger at what somebody else is doing as wrong, rather than look within and clean up my own house over here and take full responsibility for every feeling, for every word I speak and every choice that I make. That I root all of my responses to life in my principles, in truth, in unconditional love. And I can recognize that every time I react to another being and I use the excuse of their behavior to choose a behavior which is not impeccably aligned with unconditional love, generosity, kindness, gentleness, truth, that I am participating in that shadow of dishonor, and that I am here to uproot all of that, transmute it, shift it, breathe it in, digest it, and to unlock the gift that arises when I commit myself to that level of self-honesty, self-responsibility. And the only place that I can truly work with the shadow of dishonor, even though I can see it in others and I can see it in the world around me, and I can learn about the way that it moves by watching it move in others who are my sacred mirrors. The only place I can truly work with that shadow is in my own being. I can't work on that shadow in somebody else. That would be actually dishonoring their sovereignty, and in so doing, I would be replicating the pattern of dishonor in the world. So we must look carefully and compassionately at the places in our world where dishonor is present. And the more intimate that looking is, the more intimately we work with that in our thoughts, in our body, the way I either honor or dishonor my body by what I feed it. I either honor or dishonor my intelligence by what I feed it, meaning the media, the kinds of books that I read, the kinds of YouTube videos that I watch. All of that is a way of either honoring or dishonoring my being, my truth. We need to look at the relationships in our lives, and whether, first off, I am in full self-responsibility for those relationships, and whether those relationships reflect to me in any way the shadow of dishonor. We must look at the systems of our world and the extent to which we consider them honorable systems. We must notice every single molecule of blame that we might habitually cast at the world, and call that energy back into our body. Breathe it back into our own cells. If I am angry and I take full responsibility and honor my anger. And I withdraw any projection I have about who's responsible for that anger, about who caused my anger, or what caused my anger. Then I come to the root of that anger in my own being. I follow the thread back to where it's rooted in my own being. And I can own that anger. I can even celebrate that anger. I can express that anger with a fucking impeccability that does no harm or violence, that projects it not at all out onto the world and just feels it, owns it, expresses it, and lets it move through. Instead of going on some sort of campaign to get somebody else to be different so I can stop being angry. That is deeply dishonoring. So we are, as we digest the shadow of dishonor, when we learn how to honor ourselves first. And when I honor myself, I innately honor every other being, because sovereignty, true sovereignty, respects the sovereignty of every being. And I cannot honor my own sovereignty while dishonoring somebody else's. That's dishonor. And I cannot honor somebody else's sovereignty while dishonoring my own. It doesn't mean I always get what I want when I want it. It means that I do not compromise my principles and my values in order to make other people or myself comfortable. I do not compromise my values or my principles, my deep embodied cellular knowing, in order to make somebody else or myself comfortable. Because the whole thing about these shadows is learning how to be uncomfortable. It's learning how to be present with the discomfort instead of habitually moving away from the discomfort as we have been entrained to do, as our species has been experimenting with, as our DNA is coding for on a regular basis. As we do that, as we keep breathing it back into our bellies, as we keep feeling and coming back here to this present moment where the truth lives, as I bring my energy back home into my body, into my being, and I bring my power and my spirit, my sense of agency and choice back here, then I begin to unlock the gift of graciousness. And then I can meet anything that arises with graciousness. We have all experienced graciousness before. We have all been stunned by someone's graciousness at some point in our life. When somebody met a situation that was so challenging, so it met such dishonor with exquisite graciousness, with kindness and warmth, with a sense of humor and compassion. We have all witnessed this in our lives, if not in the people around us, in the stories and the myths that we've read. We know the feeling of graciousness inside of us. It is a universal pattern encoded in our DNA as a species. And so I want to share a story here about an initiation that I had in 2021 around the shadow of dishonor and the gift of graciousness and the city of grace. Because I experienced some very debilitating lower back patterns early on this year. I think day before New Year's, last day of 2020, I hurt my back dancing with a friend, and I was really hurting for a couple months, a lot of pain. But my journey has led me to a place where I have become more and more capable of turning toward my pain and saying, thank you, I love you, thank you, I love you. And this is the sort of essence of graciousness in action. When I can turn toward my pain and not be angry with it, and not try to fix it, and not sort of get caught up in my suffering around how long it's going to take to heal or how much it hurts. And I simply turn toward the sensation that's right here in my body right now, and I breathe into it. Oh, and I say, thank you, I love you, thank you. And I have been in this contemplation around my genetic inheritance, my ancestors, ancestral and collective karma and trauma healing. And I started really directly experiencing the pain in my body on a cellular level as a fractal experience that many of my ancestors who live inside of my DNA experienced as well. That this is a pattern, a tendency in the genome, in my genetic lineage, that gives rise to this experience. And it is a physical experience, some sort of nerve impingement. It's an emotional experience of feeling weak, feeling ashamed, feeling guilty. It's an experience on the astral plane and on the mental field as not being supported, as having to do it all myself, right? And on a very physical level, again, like I'm incapable of getting up out of bed without an extreme pain, and I was pretty incapable of attending to a lot of my work for a little while because I was in so much pain and just lying down so much. But instead of trying to medicate it away and take a bunch of things that would make me not feel it, I went the opposite direction, and I chose to devote myself to the spiritual practice of feeling the pain in my body. And it shifted, and it got a lot better. But it took a couple months. And then about 6 weeks later, after it had been feeling so good, this pattern reawoke in my body without any incident, without any specific event happening to trigger it. And I felt even more deeply this time the ancestors in my body, and I would lie down and just cry and feel the both physical pain sensation and also the emotional pain that was bound up inside of this lumbar region of my body, which now it had switched to the other side of my body, other side of my spine. It was on the left, now it was on the right. And I met it with I'm really proud of myself for the way that I met this pain. I'm really proud of myself for the way that I welcomed my ancestors and their pain into my field of awareness again and again and again, and surrendered to the experience again and again and again, and tended to myself and worked with my physical therapy ball and did my exercises to heal. And cleared that pattern pretty quickly. And just a couple of weeks later, my mom flew out to the island. And as I greeted her, I saw that she was walking slowly and her gait was affected. And I said, "Hey, what's up?" And she said, my lower back." Like, "What side?" She's like, "Left side." I was like, "What happened?" She's like, "That's the weird thing. Nothing happened. It just started hurting a couple of weeks ago at the same time that my back was hurting." Fast forward a month. My son comes to visit the island. And at one point we were talking about health, and he said, "Yeah, I feel pretty good, except I have this low back thing that's still bugging me." I was like, "Tell me more." He said, "Yeah, like 6 weeks ago, out of nowhere, my lower back just started hurting really bad." And now I'm like, what the fuck? We can talk about the ancestral dimensions of this stuff, but when it shows up in your field so vividly like that, what do you do? What do you do with that? You take in that data, you take in that information, and you acknowledge the veracity of that. And I did that. And I get it now on a cellular level, I get it. That I'm here to transmute the trauma of my ancestors. I'm here to breathe into and release the pain of those who came before me. I am here as a vehicle for the releasing and expunging of these shadows and these patterns within the genome, starting right here in my own body, mind, heart. And it radiates out. And there's no healing that I can do that does not radiate out most intimately into my own sort of genome and into my own ancestors, and also collectively. It radiates out into the collective field, creates momentum for a new pattern within the whole collective field. And little by little, those butterfly wing strokes start to build a whirlwind, and we are that whirlwind, and we will shake up everything in the landscape of this human world and the world that we live in. We will knock all the dead branches off the ground. We will inundate all the buildings built too close to the river. We will generate a field of change that will sweep through this world when we have fully embraced our shadows. But we will do it with graciousness, because I was able to meet my pain with graciousness instead of more contraction and tightness and numbing or fixing or meddling. I didn't try to get any body work the first 2 weeks at all. I just let it be and was gentle with it. And this is graciousness at work. This is my example of graciousness that was profoundly healing. And my back is now so strong. My body is so strong. It feels stronger than ever. And when I can learn to meet pain with graciousness, it doesn't matter where that pain is, quote, coming from. That pain is coming from inside my body. I can meet it with a listening and a curiosity and a gentleness. If that pain is coming at me from my most intimate partner, whether that's through her tears or through her finger pointing, angry, frustrated, critical blame, I can meet it with graciousness. And I have a lot to learn. I still work very much with the shadow of dishonor in that particular place where I feel judged and blamed by my partner. That's a challenging spot. That's a rich, fertile compost heap of my own contemplation and growth and practice and humility. But as I become more and more gracious, then I become an agent of life to meet pain. And that graciousness is innately healing. It's innately soothing. It is what is required to reconcile. It's what is required to diffuse conflict, to not escalate, but to diffuse conflict in any situation, in any group, to find the gracious path. So we're all learning to apprentice ourselves to graciousness, to become even more gracious. And it doesn't mean that graciousness does not let somebody do harm. No. Graciousness finds the least violent way to redirect somebody's energies from doing harm, from doing violence. Graciousness finds that fulcrum point in any conflict or situation that shifts the leverage of the situation in favor of peace, in favor of forgiveness, in favor of a soft belly and a good laugh. Can you imagine a world where every human being was radiating this gift of graciousness? That every mistake that was made was met with graciousness? That every moment of ignorance was met not with punishment and blame and rage, but with graciousness and kindness, and warmth, and firmness. Graciousness is not an excuse to be a victim. Graciousness is completely of another dimension than a sense of victimhood or perpetrator. Those archetypes cannot exist in the field of graciousness, and certainly cannot exist in the field of grace. Because as we learn, all we can do with our graciousness is to prepare the ground for the gift, the siddhi of grace, for the frequency of grace to descend upon us from the angelic realm, from the Divine Mother herself, for the Shakti of grace to saturate our cells and fill us with a sense of soft ease, a sense of welcome, a sense of being home after a long journey and great suffering and toil. Grace is beyond us, and we can ask for it. We can invite it into our lives. We can make way for it by acting gracefully and by humbling ourselves enough to ask for grace to come in. Like, oh, please. But it can't be forced. It is the Divine Feminine herself who comes on her own time, no matter what the contract might say. And our life, if we're lucky, when we're most fortunate, our life becomes suffused with grace. And things which seem difficult become easy. And our worry and our struggle and our strife and our trying and our force give way to an effortlessness and to a playfulness, to a sense of wonder at the orchestral unfolding of life and the way that the program, the way that this divine reality delights us in meeting our needs in ever surprising and miraculous ways. And so, even though we can't exactly make things happen to us the way we want to all the time, we see the perfection in everything that happens to us through the eyes of grace. That everything that happens that brings us joy and pleasure and celebration is of itself perfect. And everything that happens that brings us challenge and that shows us to where we are still patterned to entertain negative emotions and and negative thought patterns and dishonorable actions and beliefs, that too is grace, that too is perfection, that too is life refining us from love, giving us another opportunity to anchor ourselves even more deeply in grace and become even more congruent with grace as an agent of graciousness in the world. This is it. We are in a stream of life. This body is just one brief glimmer in a stream of life that is ever evolving towards more beautiful, elegant, loving patterns. And it's a long arc, but we're hitting a major bifurcation point in that arc here in 2022 as we look this year at how we can invoke grace, how we can see grace ever more clearly as always operating deep within our nature, as we can awaken the frequencies of grace within our DNA so that it ripples out through our voice, through the timbre of our voice, through the words that we speak, through the gestures of our hands, through the generosity of our giving, and remakes the world in the image of grace as graciousness. So this is the essence of my contemplation of the 22nd gene key. I'm sure there are other things that I have forgotten to speak on, but this feels good enough for now. So I'm curious where you are working with dishonor, where you are working with graciousness, and where you are finding grace in your life. I would love to share in this grace together. This is what we're here to do. So thank you for listening. I hope this was valuable for you. Please place any comments or questions or challenges in the threads, and I'll do my best to respond. Aloha ohana. Mahalo ohana.